Hi friends, how are you doing? Look, we've spent fair bit of time in the previous series of videos talking about stakeholder engagement. Moving on from there, let's look at another very important aspect in the project environment, which is risk management. First thing first, let me ask you a question. What comes to your mind when you think of the term risk? You can pause the video for like 10 seconds while you think about it. What comes to my mind are the terms like negative, something that shouldn't happen with me, something which can be associated with the failure. So these are the usual terms that are associated with the term risk. Having said that, there is a very clear and very simple definition laid out for the term risk in ISO standard 31000, which is related to risk management. And I quote the definition. It says, a risk is any uncertainty that affects the objectives. I repeat, a risk is any uncertainty that affects the objectives. So there are two key terms that we get from this definition. The first key term is uncertainty, things that may not happen. And the second key term is objective. Obviously, with every project you have certain defined objectives. So you need to look at any uncertain element of the deliverables which has a potential to affect the objectives, the end outcome of the project, and those elements are the risks for your project. Another common mistake that a few of us make, and I would admit that I've made those errors myself as well, is confusing between the term risk and issue. Going back to the definition, the term uncertainty is the key element here. So any uncertainty that affects the objectives would be considered a risk as per the definition. The moment you remove the uncertainty element and it is clear or certain that a certain situation will definitely affect the project objectives, that will be considered as an issue and not as a risk. Let me clarify using a very simple example. At the start of the project, you identify that one of your key SMEs is not very motivated and may exit the organization during the course of the transition. 2 months into the project, the SME actually resigns, so this will no longer be a risk, rather will be considered as an issue, because now there is no uncertainty associated with this situation, and it is rather clear or certain that the SME will cease to exist from the organization. So that's the key difference between the term risk and issues. It's very important that we don't confuse between these two terms because these two situations are reported or managed very differently. Let us also look at the stages involved in the risk management process as defined by PMI, the Project Management Institute. So the first stage is the identification of the risks. After you've identified the risk, you move on to analyzing the risks. You perform both qualitative and quantitative analysis, where you categorize the risks, you do probability and impact analysis, you do risk modeling, and you do the overall risk profile for your program or your project. After you've done all these analyses, you move to the next stage, which is about defining a risk response strategy, whereby you assign an owner for each of the risk items, and you also define a response plan to say whether you are going to avoid the risk or you are looking to mitigate the risk, or you can't do anything about it and you will accept or transfer the risk. So after you have defined a clear strategy or a plan to respond to a risk situation, you move on to the final stage of controlling or managing the risk. In this stage, you do risk audits, or you keep an eye on the uncertain elements or the risks, and trigger the response plan as necessary. So this is the risk management process as defined by PMI. Obviously, in the forthcoming videos, I will look to share my own learnings, my own experiences related to these stages or these processes. That's all for today. So basically, we've covered the very basic elements of risk management. We've looked at the definition of the risk. We've looked at the difference between a risk and an issue. We have gone through the risk management process as defined by PMI. So yes, thank you very much for signing in, and until I make my next video, thank you and goodbye.